everyone, it's Julian, and today I'm super excited to be showing you how to make music like Claptone. As usual, you get the project file and samples from this video in the description, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because they will be available. And yeah, let's get started. So the first thing that we have here is this piano riff, which sounds like this. So I'll show you the MIDI first. Basically, the way that I made this was just kind of by making these little, this simple kind of minor-based chord progression. It's basically 3 chords. It's this one, B minor, F sharp minor, and then some sort of E major thing. But yeah, so basically, the way you write these kind of patterns, like you hear a lot in Claptone's music and a lot in general in this kind of house, is basically starting with these chords. Like I said, I just kind of defined my chord progression, and then I just went from there with the rhythm. So what we've got is, like I said, these are just basic minor and major chords. Like in this case, it's just this B minor. I put the third up an octave there, and then I'm just kind of adding these extra little melody notes in between. Like I have it kind of playing like this bouncy pattern. It's hard to explain other than just to say, like I said, if you start with the chords and then just kind of use notes that work in that key, to make the little extra sort of melody, bouncy rhythm notes, it's not too difficult. This didn't take me too long to write this kind of part, and it sounds really cool. I think this sounds really interesting, actually. It's kind of a nice way to play around with the chord progression and still have very melodic music like Claptone does, where, like I said, his music is very chord progression based and very much around kind of taking more sort of simple chord progressions like this and then giving them that bouncy sort of house feel. So it's kind of a good way to do that. So there's the MIDI. As far as the sound goes for this one, the way I made it was using Ableton's grand piano, actually. And basically, I just kind of played around with some of these knobs. I turned the brightness up, I turned the hardness up a bit, and I turned the tone up a bit as well. What I was going for, and you'll see this more as I go through the processing here, is I was just trying to give it more of that bright sort of not a sampled piano, like a sample of a loop or something like that, but kind of sounding like it's a sample, if that makes any sense. But it's still obviously programmed. Now, after the grand piano, what I have here is I have this chorus, and what this is doing is it's adding a sort of metallicness to the sound. It's giving it, just kind of a more, I guess, metallic kind of sound is the best way I could put it. Here's what it sounds like without the chorus, and then with it. You can hear it's very subtle, but again, the wateriness from that chorus really gives it that bright digital kind of sound that you want. And when I say digital, I just mean kind of similar to a Korg M1 or something like that kind of piano. So then the next thing I have after that is this EQ8, and you can see what I'm doing here with this EQ8 is I'm cutting out a bunch of the low end because that kind of helps make it a little bit more sampled feeling, like I was saying. And also, you can hear there's kind of a lot of low end in this, which was getting in the way of the bass, but I've cut that out, and then I boosted the highs here. So this is kind of going to what I was saying before, you want that bright sort of digital metallic kind of piano sample sound. So that was what I did. I just brought this up a bunch. That's what it sounds like without it. And then with it, you can hear, just bringing up that high mid-range and then the high end. And I think it sounds good. This is more, the thing about this EQ is I know a lot of times people say you don't want to boost with an EQ. But truth be told, if you're using, it kind of just depends on what you're using the EQ for. In this case, I'm using it for sound design. I'm trying to shape this sound into something more like what I want, and I'm making big changes and drastic things here. I'm not trying to do subtle mixing. I'm trying to change the sound drastically to get it more to what I want. So for that purpose, doing an EQ like this where you're boosting up to 8 dB of gain on all that range and the frequency spectrum, it's perfectly fine. Again, it's just for sound design. And for the cause of sound design, there's really nothing that I think is wrong. So then the next thing we have here is this echo, which sounds like this. You can hear kind of with and without it. Basically what it's doing is it's just adding a bit more texture to the sound. This is what makes it sound more organic and analog. Having an echo like this is a good way to do that, because if you have a really fast time like I have here, you can see I don't have it synced, I just have it set to this time setting. You can get that kind of fast echo that really makes it sound like a sample, or even just more old school sounding, because this was how people used to use delay a lot back in the day. So yeah, it's pretty subtle. It's just giving it some space and giving it a bit more of the texture that I wanted. Then after that, I've got a little bit of reverb to just give it a little bit more space. And a little bit more texture as well, as you can hear. And then finally, I just have a compressor sidechaining it to the kicks. So that's it for the piano. It's really not too difficult, like I said. Like I was saying, if you just kind of break it down and define your chord progression and then just sort of find notes within that work for all the rhythmic stuff, it's not too hard to write parts like this. And same thing with the sound. Like, you can see, it's all pretty straightforward. All of this stuff is, like, pretty obvious, and it's stuff that you would probably do as well if you were trying to get this sound. So the next thing I have here is the bass, which sounds like this. So this is kind of like the standard Claptone style bass. It's like kind of a filtered down saw wave. I'll explain that more in a second. I'll show you the notes first. So basically what we have is it's following the chord progression just like the piano. And then I just have like a few little extra bouncy notes here and there. Like you can see, kind of starts out each part with these longer notes, and then on the ending here of each bar, that's where those notes come in. And that's kind of a similar thing to like how I was saying writing the chord progression or the chord patterns goes. It's like these are all just extra notes that were in the key of this and sounded good with the piano. Meaning like if you play this with the piano, those notes aren't going to clash with it. That's also very important. But yeah, it's just kind of about finding notes that work in the key and work with all the other instruments. And just kind of throwing them in there rhythmically, like with the 16th notes. Like you can see, like these ones and these. And yeah, just kind of like, I don't know, it's not really a whole lot to say. It's more a feeling than it is really like a process you have to think about, I feel like, when you're writing these kind of bass lines. I mean, it's not too difficult. I would say, like, these bass lines definitely sound very heavily influenced by, like, Daft Punk. Like, they have that kind of, like, disco live bass feel. So maybe listening to some of that kind of music as well can help you, like, yeah, it's not really too difficult to write these, though. Like I said, it's just kind of following the chord progression and then just some extra notes that are in the key of that chord progression. So then as far as the sound goes here, it's also pretty simple. Basically what I have is I just have a saw wave, and then that's going into a low-pass filter, which is cutting out a bunch of the high end. So here's what a saw wave sounds like on its own, which, as you can hear, isn't really that smooth. It doesn't really fit with this, and it definitely doesn't sound like Claptone. But I hear a lot in his tracks that this is kind of what he does. He'll just have a saw wave, and then have it filtered down a bit, either with a low-pass filter or a band-pass filter. And then, yeah, that kind of gets you that sound where you can still hear that it's a saw wave, and you still get that kind of grit to the sound, but it's just not as, like, intense, I guess you would say. I mean, really, the way I would put it is it's not taking over the whole mix the way it was before. So, yeah, really pretty simple there. But like I said, definitely an important thing to note, the saw wave going into the low-pass filter to get the deep sound, as opposed to just like using a sine wave or a triangle wave, which I don't think would sound as close. So then after that, I just have a bit of saturation here. You can see I've turned the drive up a bit, and I changed the color mode to the sinoid fold. So just kind of gives it a little bit more texture, a little bit more grit. It's a little bit stronger than the analog clip. Here's what it sounds like on analog clip. And then sinoid fold. So yeah, you can hear it kind of brings out that like gritty saw wave sound a little bit more. And that's really what I wanted. Like I said, like the vibe here is kind of like the Daft Punk style, like live sounding synth basses. And this is a really good way to kind of get that tone. So then the last thing I have on there is just a compressor, side chaining it to the kick. And that's it for the bass. So then the next thing that I have here that I'm going to show you are actually these hi-hats, which sound like this. So what these are is actually I have a shaker as one of the hi-hats, oddly enough. And then I have this 909 open hi-hat. So basically what's happening is these two are just kind of playing off of each other. The goal here is to make the shaker sound as live as possible, and then just kind of have the 909 hi-hat like over top of that, I guess, on the upbeats for the groove. And the way that I've done this here, and the way that you could achieve this as well, is just by the way I program the shakers. You can see this is just a one shot in a simpler, and then what I've done is I made this pattern where the velocities are kind of staggered, and then the upbeat is the loudest one. So it's kind of like, you know what I mean? It's kind of like how you would play a live shaker. Like, if you were playing a live shaker, you wouldn't just play all the same velocities, or shaking, I guess. Like, that doesn't really sound that realistic. But when you have these sort of staggered velocities, like I said, that's what gives it kind of like a more live sound. And when you play it on its own, it's not, like, the strongest. Like, or not that it's not the strongest, but it's just not, like, really sounding live. But when you play it in the full mix, and it's as quiet as this one is, and it's underneath that 909 hi-hat, which is really coming out on top, you can hear it sounds like there's a live shaker in the background. So that's pretty much that. The only other thing I did on the shaker was I just kind of compressed it, sidechained it to the kick with this compressor, just to make it fit with the groove a little bit more. And then on the open hi-hat, I didn't really do too much. I just kind of took this sample and I brought it in here and I shortened it a little bit. You can see I have no sustain and I turned the decay down a bit. So just kind of giving it, just kind of shortening it and making it a little bit tighter and kind of fit with the groove a little bit more so it's not just like ringing out the whole time. So the next thing that we have here are these congas, which sound like this. You can hear how they fit into the beat when I play them with the hi-hats. So basically what these are just 3 conga samples. And I've just put them into a drum rack here, and then you can see I made this little pattern. So I'm talking about this a lot on here, but I really like using drum racks, not for like my whole drums, because that can be a little bit hard to mix. But I like using it when you just have a few percussion sounds like this that are kind of like in the similar range, frequency-wise, and kind of like sonically. So you want them to be like in one track for the, controlling the volume and all that. But yeah, I really like using it for that because it's a good way to just put them all together. Like if I had these in their own individual MIDI tracks, it would be a little bit hard to keep track of, and it would be hard to sort of like program them to play off of each other. I guess I could do something like this where you kind of like, I could like look at the MIDI while I'm programming it. But in this case, yeah, it's just easier to put them all into a drum rack. So that's what I've done here. And then these are just kind of playing off of the beat. I feel like these give it a little bit more groove. I've definitely heard this a lot in Claptone's music, and if you turn it off, it's a little bland. This is kind of like extra ear candy on top of the beat that isn't like extra in the sense that it's too much or it's like stuff that you wouldn't want to have, but it's just extra like something on top of it that is again like adding to the beat and building it up a little bit more. So the next thing we have here is the kick, which sounds like this. And you can see I have no processing on this kick. It's just kind of like a powerful, sort of like punchy, deep kick. The only thing I can say about this is you just have to find one that kind of sounds not exactly like this, but kind of similar to this, where it's just like a short, tight, kind of like punchy. Yeah, just sort of like bassy kick like that. And then also like just making it work with the bass. Like you can hear the relationship between those two is pretty good. You can hear the bass very clearly. You can also hear the kick very clearly. And they're both doing different things, so they don't get in the way of each other. So that's really all you gotta watch out for, because the bass line is pretty important for this music, and you definitely don't want it to be like knocked out of the way by the kick. So then the last thing I have here is this clap, which sounds like this. This is a pretty standard, kind of like live style clap. Basically, the way I made it was I just took 2 claps and put them together. So we have this one, which is a little bit faster and sort of like clickier, and then this one, which is a little bit softer, but it helps to beef it up. So this is the style of clap I hear a lot in Claptone's music. Wow, I blanked there for a second. But yeah, I hear this kind of clap a lot in Claptone's music. Like he'll have these kind of like more live claps. I feel like it works really well with the vibe of this, like especially with the live like sounding congas and the shaker and like the organic vibes from the piano. Definitely like these kind of claps work really well. So yeah, really not too much to it. Like I said, I just kind of layered 2 together here to get the sound and kind of like make it more unique as well. And yeah, now the only other thing I'll say, if you want your claps to sound really live, you can hear this if I solo them with the kick. Basically what I've done here is I've programmed them a little bit ahead of the beat. You can see this is the line where it should be hitting on if it was like perfectly on the grid, but I moved them back a little bit. I also did that on this one. It's the same amount. And yeah, what this basically just does is it makes the clap sound more live, because if you think about it, like say this was just a recording of a group of people clapping in a room, you could never get everybody to clap at exactly the same time. You'd always have it be kind of like, like something like that where it's a lot of claps happening slightly off from each other. And so this kind of recreates that. Like it makes it not perfectly on the beat. And then, yeah, you just get that more like human, organic kind of vibe. So that's pretty much it for this one. I just want to show you guys some techniques that I picked up on hearing Claptone's music. And yeah, so that's me for today, guys. Make sure to let me know what you think of this video in the comments, and make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. Once again, you can get the project file and samples from this video either on my Bandcamp or on my Patreon if you're a patron there. So make sure to check that out. You can also see all my social media on the screen right now and in the description. And yeah, thank you again, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another tutorial.